Well, good morning here in the US and good evening to anyone joining us from Africa. Welcome to Open Classroom. I'm Janet Gillow, the Director of Professional Development here at the Brown School, joined by just a great team of Washington University colleagues, including Cynthia Williams, who's the Assistant Dean for Community Partnerships here at the Brown School. Also, Dr. Tracy Spitznagle, who is a professor of physical therapy and obstetrics and gynecology, who's going to be moderating Q&A for us. So for those of you joining on the Zoom webinar, we can't see or hear you, and we also can't call on raised hands, but chat is enabled, and we do want to include the audience in this conversation, so please feel free to send in questions and comments as we go. I want to send a special welcome to anybody joining on YouTube or watching this recording in the future. We're glad to have you with us, and we're not able to moderate Q&A through YouTube. So before we get started today, I just want to let you know what's coming up on Open Classroom. We have one more program of this semester, this Thursday, December 16th, Inclusive Perspectives, Increasing Employment Opportunities for People with Disabilities. Kimberly Lackey is going to be joining us from Paraquad. Then we're going to take a break over the semester break and the holidays, but we're returning with probably our busiest semester of programming ever for spring of 22. Our first program will be on Tuesday, January the 11th. We're doing a program on Medicaid expansion in Missouri, first impressions on the implementation. Dr. Tim McBride is joining us. And this is the first in our Brown School Curriculum Showcase series. Basically, we're doing a program from all the concentrations and specializations within the Brown School's degrees, kind of a sample class for our prospective students. And we decided to invite you as well. So come see what the Brown School has to offer. We've got an amazing lineup of speakers and programs. But now to start today's program, I'm pleased to introduce Kurt Dirks. He's Washington University's Vice Chancellor of International Affairs and the Bank of America Professor of Leadership. Kurt, please take us away.
Well, good day to everyone, whether you're in the US, Africa, or somewhere else. It's great to have you with us here in the last Africa Speaks of this semester. Let me give you just a little bit of background on the series that we've run this last semester. And it started several years ago. We decided to put a spotlight on the large amount of work and collaboration going on between Washington University faculty and faculty in Africa. And one of those ways that we did that was to start Africa Speaks, which was this is part of this series. Last year, we heard from our Washington University faculty who were doing work on the continent. And this year, we decided we wanted to hear from our partners in Africa. All of this intending to help us build new work, new collaboration, and to learn from each other. And so we're very excited to have today's session cap off our semester. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Louis Wall. Louis is a member, in fact, of the steering committee of the Africa Initiative and has played a key role in helping us design this series as well as other activities that we've had on the Africa Initiative over the last several years. More importantly, Dr. Wall has played a huge role in research and activity here at Washington University in helping us understand what the important issues in Africa and building partnerships in Africa. Dr. Wall is the Professor Emeritus now of Sociocultural Anthropology and Obstetrics and Gynecology here at Washington University, so he has an appointment both on the Danforth campus and in the School of Medicine. Dr. Wall has a lifetime of work, done a lifetime of work in the social and clinical aspects of reproductive health problems in developing countries, and has been actively involved in a variety of projects in Ethiopia, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, and Niger. In addition to his clinical work, Dr. Wall is engaged in a large collaborative project to improve the lives of adolescent schoolgirls in Ethiopia. The Menstrual Dignity Period is a collaborative effort between Mekelle University, the Mariam Siba Sanitary Products Factory, and the St. Louis-based nonprofit charity called Dignity Period. Mekelle University provided him with a global medal for his meritorious contributions to medical education to recognize some of that work. And he's also going to, and now I think, share a little bit about some of his other work and also. So Louis, thanks for your leadership in the Africa Initiative, Africa Speaks. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen, and can you all see those slides?
Mhm.
Good. I want to just spend a few moments setting the background for the work that Alice Emasu and her organization has been doing in Africa. And let's see. The short take-home message from this talk is it's difficult to be a poor woman in a poor country. And here you see a good example of the struggles of what life is like for a poor woman in Ethiopia. Alice has been particularly engaged with a problem called obstetric vesicovaginal fistula. And this is a problem that's no longer seen in advanced industrialized countries like Scandinavia, Canada, the United States. But it's basically a hole that develops between the bladder and the vagina as a result of obstetrical trauma that results in continuous urinary incontinence. This is not an occasional dribble. This is a continuous outpouring of urine that the woman affected can no longer control. And here's an example of an injury like this in an Ethiopian woman. You can see a metal catheter placed into the urethra, and you can see that the base of the bladder has simply vanished as a result of a labor complication. It's estimated that there are perhaps 2 million women currently living with vesicovaginal fistulas worldwide. Almost all of those women are in Africa or in poor parts of South Asia. And in poor countries, the main causes of this complication are untreated obstructed labor and associated surgical complications now with cesarean delivery. So obstructed labor occurs when the fetus will not fit through the birth canal. The uterus continues to contract, but there's no space for the baby to get through. And as a result, the bony plate of the fetal head traps the soft tissues of the pelvis between the bony fetal head and the bony pelvic structures. This leads to compression of the bladder, neck, and urethra. The urine continues to fill into the bladder. The bladder gets fuller and fuller and thinner and more progressively vulnerable. Eventually, the blood supply to those tissues is shut off. They die, and eventually they slough away, leaving large gaps between the bladder and the vagina. The fetus almost always dies, and if the woman herself does not die from infection or hemorrhage or a complication, after the stillbirth is passed, she's left with these terrible injuries. So here you can see the dead tissue that's been crushed in the pelvis. It sloughs away a few days later, and the woman is left with this tremendous hole between the urinary tract and the genital tract. The fellow on the left is a friend of mine, Jonathan Karshima, who's a very distinguished Nigerian gynecologist. And with him is a fistula patient who's just come into his clinic. Jonathan's about 5'8", so you can see how tiny this woman is. And this was the bed on which she was sitting 5 minutes before we took the photograph. So this gives you some idea of what life is like for the woman with the fistula and the possible implications of that. But it's not just a urinary tract injury. Any soft tissue in the pelvis can be affected by this process. You get injuries to the urinary tract, you get terrible damage, scarring in the vagina. Women can have the nerves to the lower extremities compressed by the fetal head and lose the ability to lift their foot and to walk. The muscles of the pelvis are often damaged. You get similar injuries to the anus and rectum, which can lead to fecal incontinence as well. The constant excoriation of the skin by urine and stool leads to terrible skin infections. Fetal death is common. And perhaps the most devastating thing is the social ostracism that then occurs to the injured woman who can't control her excrement. So obstetric fistula is a devastating psychosocial and economic injury to the patient over and above the physical damage that occurs to her. And this is not an exaggeration. Here's what Johann Diefenbach, a famous German surgical pioneer, wrote in the 1830s. The air of the room of the unfortunate woman nauseates the visitor and drives him off. All family ties are torn asunder by this terrible disease. The husband has an aversion for his own wife. The tender mother is exiled from the circle of her own children. She sits solitary and alone in the cold on a perforated chair. This is not fiction, but naked truth. And the cure for such an evil is the prize for which we labor. This is one of the neglected tropical diseases. That term is generally used for a whole series of parasitic infections that affect the poor parts of the world. And the characteristics of neglected tropical diseases are they're rarely seen in industrialized nations. They primarily affect the poor. They perpetuate and increase poverty among the people who are affected. They are underappreciated as a cause of morbidity and mortality, especially in the West, where we don't have personal familiarity with these injuries or diseases. They're highly stigmatizing, but they can be prevented and treated using proven cost-effective means, but they persist due to a lack of political will to commit the resources needed to eradicate or control them. And obstetric fistula is a similar condition. But unlike the other neglected tropical diseases, which affect men, women, and children, obstetric fistula is a disease of women of reproductive age. And if you compare the map on the left, which shows you the maternal mortality ratio, and look at where the neglected tropical diseases persist, you can see a stunning overlap between maternal mortality and neglected tropical diseases. So I won't give you Alice's entire biography. I'll let her tell you that. But Alice is from Uganda. She grew up in difficult circumstances due to her father's early death. She struggled as a girl to get food and education, but she graduated from Makerere University in Uganda and became a journalist with the newspaper New Vision. And they hired her as their women's beat reporter to cover women's issues. And after she'd done that for a few years, she went back to her home community in Soroti to discover that a substantial number of her schoolmates had died from maternal complications or had suffered these catastrophic injuries. And so she founded a local organization called Terrewode that she will talk to you about here in a moment. Terrewode focuses on obstetric fistula, but uses it as a wedge issue to move into all the other areas empowering girls and women. They identify fistula victims, form fistula solidarity groups, provide access to clinical services, including fistula repair for affected women. They set up microfinance and job skills training programs, safe motherhood, social reintegration programs for women trying to get back into society. And in 2019, Alice's dream of opening a full-service specialist fistula center that would care not only for the physical injuries of these women, but also the psychosocial and economic impact that this condition has on Ugandan women. The Terrewode Women's Community Hospital opened in Soroti in 2019. It has a distinguished board of governors, and I'm happy to serve on that board. And without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to my inspirational friend and colleague, Alice Emasu. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I will not repeat my names. I feel privileged to share Obstetric Uganda. Have I actually conquered Obstetric Uganda? I say yes, there is significant progress in the level of awareness about obstetric fistula and its connection with the poor maternal health outcomes in the country. There are today some resources, especially the medical specialists, the doctors who can repair fistula. There is some level of commitment by our government and the Ministry of Health in particular in organizing and promoting the repair of obstetric fistula through medical camps. And very recently, through the effort of Terrewode, the commissioning of a dedicated health facility, Terrewode Women's Community Hospital in Uganda, the only one so far that is providing routine care for obstetric fistula. We run theater days 3 times a week, and women are now able to walk in here and receive diagnosis and walk back to their communities while smiling. The overall goal of my journey, which started over 20 years ago, is to contribute to the elimination of obstetric fistula and improve maternal health outcomes for many women and girl children who become unfortunate and enter childbearing prematurely. Where did this idea come from? What was the darkness then? What was my motivation? It all started when I learned of my whom I went to school with perished due to preventable conditions of childbirth. However, 2 of them remained alive. This program that I started later on helped those 2 to receive the care. The need then that motivated me to start this journey was the limited level of awareness about obstetric fistula and maternal mortality. Many people didn't know about the causes, later on the treatment and its effect on the mothers. And as a result, the mothers were waiting for too long to receive the treatment for obstetric fistula. And that was my motivation to take up this challenge. However, I truly wanted to tell the story of these girls. I also had unanswered questions. Then, why was the community silent about this problem? What was causing this problem? Was it a fault of the ladies? Was it the health worker for fistula among these women?
Alice, your sound is dropping in and out for us. I wonder if you could silence your video to see if that helps with the audio.
Saw me prematurely join the media. This could enter into media work as a journalist, where I started highlighting these issues in the media. Later on, I also realized that this work opened my eyes to the bigger problem of maternal health and the flaws in the fight to improve maternal health in the country. I realized that very little, if not none at all, of obstetric fistula experiences were being documented. As a journalist, I felt less was being done at every level of society to address the plight of women who were suffering obstetric fistula, let alone to prevent those who are at high risk from suffering from obstetric fistula by the authorities. I felt that I could do something better. I could contribute. But then I realized that it was not enough for me to do this work individually. I then decided to mobilize women leaders from my community to start the campaign to raise awareness about these conditions. I then moved to institutionalize this idea into an organization, Terrewode. As an institution, we began to do this work more routinely of creating awareness. But I also realized that I had a challenge. I had a skills gap on how to make this organization better positioned to routinely challenge the status quo and improve collaborations, call on our governments to prioritize these issues. And so I opted to go and pursue a graduate course in mass communication to better my skills. Later on, I again, with these skills, embraced and of Uganda, in 2007. Remember then, previously, there were some women being treated in camps by Doctors Without Borders. And that was how government was dealing with the issue. And so we were collaborating to refer women to these camps. But in 2007, this had stopped. There was inconsistency in the way care was being provided. I also realized then that on average, women were living with this condition for 10 years. Living with this condition, hidden in communities. In 2001, I then institutionalized Terrewode and implemented this campaign. In 2007, I was stuck with what else can I do for the master's, for the graduate studies at WashU, where I studied a master's in social work. I wanted to improve my skills to better deal with this issue. However, even by then, I had now conceived an idea. I felt it was the only solution, the best strategy that would maximize care for these women was to establish a dedicated fistula hospital in Uganda. I had now learned about the 60-year-old Hamlin Fistula Hospital in Ethiopia, but I had not had the opportunity to visit it. But while at the Brown I continued pursuing ways and strategies to establish a dedicated hospital. I went back home. I continued to support government efforts through Terrewode to treat women in camps, medical camps. I did not strongly believe in it, but I had to try and reduce on the long waiting time. In 2019, we commissioned Terrewode Women's Community Hospital. But it was not an easy move. I could not the day I could not believe it's but at the time I considered the idea of building the hospital. I had a lot of fear. I felt overwhelmed with anxiety as to what the reaction of government would be like. Where was I going to find the specialists, the health workers to run this hospital? Where were the resources going to come from? I was also concerned about the land where this hospital would stand. It all sounded like outside me. I felt passionate and ready to move on. It took time. I want to thank all the people, especially Professor Louis Wall. When I was in the Brown School, he kept on telling me it is possible. He was the first person ever I met who told me the idea of building a dedicated hospital was a best strategy. That was a smart strategy. Whoever I would tell this idea would rubbish it. And they would call me crazy. They would call me names. Today, this hospital is providing routine services. Like I said earlier, women walk into this facility from different parts of Uganda. Anytime we are providing care throughout the year. Our annual target is we have the capacity to provide care to 600 patients. We have not stopped collaborating with Ministry of Health to support camps, but we are already taking best practices from this facility to government facilities, to those medical camps. We think we can do it better. The plan for Terrewode Women's Community is to become a center of excellence in the care of obstetric fistula and providing holistic management. We already have a dedicated health workers range. They are unique health workers in the country. Fistula remains something that is not known, even among health workers, the doctors in this country. This is because in the medical schools, fistula is still being taught as a course unit, which is taught in a 2-hour lecture and left to the students to prioritize, to decide to prioritize, or not to focus on it as a major subject. And even those who express interest and show passion to specialize in fistula care, they are beaten by this lack of equipment, the lack of medical supplies and drugs, the theater, the infrastructure that is dedicated to provide that. And so they find themselves abandoning fistula care and opting to do to help with other health conditions. This hospital, Terrewode Women's Hospital, is repositioning itself to become a training institution for better management of obstetric fistula and related birth injuries. Even the local governments, there is a lot of lack of knowledge on the relationship between fistula and the high maternal mortality rates. In Uganda, we have made progress. 16 mothers today die every day due to complications of preventable childbirth. 16 every day. And 2 to 3 mothers end up with birth injuries, with obstetric fistula being the most then when this idea, I confronted it, our maternal mortality rate stood at 500,000 women deaths per 100,000 live births. Much, much higher than the 16 who are dying today. But even then, 16 is still high. It's unacceptable. Our aim is to quality and elimination of obstetric fistula through providing training in fistula care and management. We hope that in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be improvement of fistula in the country. It is unfortunate. In the last 2 years, when COVID-19 hit the country, it seems to be taking us back to the drawing board. At Terrewode Women's Community Hospital, we are receiving teenagers, 15 years, 14 years, 20 years, coming in search for fistula treatment. Out there, outside Terrewode Women's Community Hospital, at every hospital in the country, you meet huge numbers of teenagers who have become mothers prematurely. Either they are carrying babies, or they are, live babies, or they are carrying babies still in their womb. Or in search for health care. This could be threaten the capacity of our health system further, and we could easily slip back into the status quo 20 years ago. We are also positioning Terrewode Women's Community Hospital to become a research institution on issues of obstetric fistula and related. There is very little research on obstetric fistula. And because of that, it's affecting programming, policy making, policy enforcement, as well as service delivery. Because we do not have sufficient evidence to provide on obstetric fistula, many of our local governments and the government are unable to even integrate obstetric fistula in their annual work plans, in their annual budgets. We are now campaigning and building capacity of especially the local governments to integrate obstetric fistula concerns in their annual budgets and in their annual work plans. Even if these budgets and work plans, but at least to come and support the government. My take-home message to all of you in almost all our communities, especially in the different parts of the world, especially in Africa and Asia, there are this darkness. There is still some kind of darkness. You are likely going to be able to identify some needs that are affecting humanity. It is therefore my call to you and to all of us to deliberately look out for these needs that are affecting the human race and to rise up to the challenge to address them, no matter what it takes. I thank you so much for listening to me. And I hope that I have been able to inspire you. You'll face challenges. There will be gaps along the way. But what is going to make it successful? What will make you successful is the passion, is the commitment, and the determination to continue. I thank all our stakeholders, our development partners. I again want to thank you so much, Louis Wall, for coming down to the rural parts of Uganda and supporting this vision and supporting this work. I thank the Brown School administration for organizing this platform. Awareness is lacking. We have to continue awareness. Thank you very much.
Alice, thank you so much for that inspiring talk. You always make me feel like I'm gonna tear up. As you know me well, I get a little verklempt sometimes and the words don't always come out. But I wanted to ask, you have such a wonderful vision about where you want to go. And you've kind of staged this vision across time, but what was the one thing that maybe surprised you so far related to the process that you've been going through to provide these programs for the women of Uganda?
I think the one thing is that these women come to seek for care when they are totally feeling withdrawn, feeling helpless and powerless. And within a minute, in a few days, you see them wearing a smile. They are hopeful. They walk back home confident, ready to begin a new journey, and willing to become the agents for change. The other one is that all over the world, globally, there are people who are willing to be part of a vision that improves the lives of humanity. You will never know them, but as you continue, you'll come across them and they will hold your hand and support you. This is what is really surprising to me, that each day I have come across people like you who are willing to support this vision. I thank you for that question.
Alice, I have another question, or maybe I'd like to encourage you to share just a little bit more about community engagement, potentially talking about your solidarity groups and the impact that they have on their community.
Thank you again for this question. With limited resources, we identified that these women are capable of creating sustainable awareness. We decided to empower them and give them the opportunity to participate in creating awareness in the community, engaging their leaders, the authorities, the health workers. We trained them in music, dance, and drama. It wasn't our idea to train them. In 2005, before camp, we hoped that the women's life would change automatically. But many of them kept on coming back to us, seeking for care, experiencing a state of powerlessness. And we sat down with a few of them and asked, what is that you think we can do to change this completely? And we recognized that they have some talents. They say they would support the campaign to better their lives because they can sing. They can sing in their local languages. They can dance and they can act drama. And drama is culturally accepted as a means of communication in most communities in Uganda. So all we do is to empower them with skills in music, dance, and drama. And then they go and stage this education to different parts of the country. Today we have more than 27 fistula community solidarity groups, most of them led by former fistula patients, who are survivors who are now fully reintegrated in their communities. And it's really amazing how some of them can boldly engage with the authorities and demand for services and demand for attention. Even though most of these actions have not translated to significant resources allocation to address this issue, but it has created high level of awareness and appreciation of the role of women, of the role of mothers in these communities.
Alice, I'd like to ask, what resources are you still needing, and how could the audience help you today to support you in your goals?
Thank you for that question. It is costly to provide routine care for these women with obstetric fistula. These women walk into this facility unable to pay for anything, not even their transportation, because they are very poor and they are neglected. They are ostracized by their families. If you ask them to pay for transportation, they will never get here. These women stay here on average 14 days in hospitalization, and then another 14 days for integration empowerment. That's a whole month. And they are feeding. They are also drugs, that facility. All this requires funds. We have been able to provide care in this hospital to over 500 patients with support from our development partners who provide us with grants and donations. The best help that we can ask of you is to support our development partners. We can receive the support from our development partners. In the United States, we receive support from the Worldwide Fistula Fund and Terrewode Women's Fund. These are all in the United States. And I think that they can facilitate these linkages to make these resources available in a sustainable way. There is also the social integration component, whereby they have to go back to the community, and you empower them, you skill them to be able to participate in the economic activities, income generating activities. All this kind of support requires resources. It requires funds. It requires some money directly to sustain them. But also, we can you have some good, great social workers and other professionals who could volunteer their time. All these plans of us training, turning this institution into a training for health workers institution, developing it to undertake quality research requires collaborations, strategic collaborations for quality research.
Alice, could you speak a little bit to how you work with the schools and the police in your area?
I hope I've answered the question. Sure. So in schools, we build capacity of the school structures to sustain health education, to educate young people about the risks of teen pregnancies, the risks of child marriages, and as well as how to work with the schools to establish fistula clubs in those schools. The religious institutions, not only schools, the religious institutions, to increase awareness about obstetric fistula. Fistula in identification of the ladies who are affected by fistula and making referrals of the former fistula patients. When it comes to the justice institution, to increase awareness, the starting point is really to increase awareness about this condition. These cases, there are women who are suffering violence because of fistula. There are also, and because of this violence, it led them to suffer fistula. So obstetric fistula cause and
Alice,
result.
a few more minutes.
Authorities, the justice institutions, they have the mandate. They have the responsibility to ensure that women receive justice. But in the process, realizing that they actually
Alice, I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon or this morning for us. It was really inspiring to listen to your story, and to know you as a person has been a joy for me. To know that you are influencing so many inspiring minds that they could take their dream and make it a reality is a wonderful gift that you give beyond what you do just in Uganda. So it's greatly appreciated for you to take the time out of your busy schedule to spend time in this open classroom. With that being said, I just want to give Louis any chance that he has one more thing that he'd like to say that hasn't been mentioned before we end the program.
I would encourage everybody to go to the website for the Terrewode Women's Fund and the Worldwide Fistula Fund. And if you can contribute, the money can go directly to Alice to help support her work in Uganda. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much. And with that, I would just like to say thank you to the African Initiative for allowing us to bring Alice to the table today. It's been a really rich morning for us all.
I want to say thank you so much for providing this platform. I hope I have been able to inspire you. I look forward to seeing all of you in Uganda whenever it's convenient and to working with you.
Thank you. And with that, I think we'll close the program.